Hey everyone, I'm Nathan. I'm excited to be with you today as we're going to be talking about the Greatest Commandment. Do you know what the Greatest Commandment is? If you do, great. If you don't, I promise if you stick around, you'll know in a few minutes. But before we get into that, I've been reading a lot of news articles this past week trying to keep up with what's going on in the world. And one that I came across that stuck out was recently President Duterte offered a 10 million peso reward to any Filipino who developed a vaccine for COVID-19. And my friend Jansen, he's a receptionist, I think in Manila, and he thought to himself, man, 10 million pesos? I think I could whip something up that would maybe do the trick. And so he gathered a bunch of materials from his house. I think he's got some kind of sauce or something in his hands. He's got dish soap, lotion, Purell, some vinegar. In his caption he said, I think I need more garlic. Which he's doing this as a joke, but I thought the story reflected something that's kind of interesting about COVID-19, and that even though it's a crazy time, and in some ways it's really pulling people apart, in others COVID-19 has brought communities together, it's brought the world together, as we're all trying to combat this pandemic that's happening. And so I thought this article was a cool illustration of how in some ways COVID has brought us together, but especially in the home, in other ways, it can be very straining on relationships. A lot of the articles I read this week talked about just the difficulties of an extended isolation and an extended quarantine, and how it can affect your mental, emotional, and physical health, and how it can just be difficult for relationships, even with those that you're close to. And so that's why we're talking about the Greatest Commandment today, because hopefully that'll help a little bit. If any of you have been experiencing what I've been experiencing, and a lot of my friends and family that I've talked to have been experiencing as well, where you love the people you're with, but when you're so close together for such an extended period of time, it's kind of like a pressure cooker, and that even these really little things, when they're over a long period of time and you're kind of stuck in this pressure cooker, if it builds enough, it explodes. And so we don't want that to happen, and so that's why we're talking about the Greatest Commandment today, which we find in Matthew 22. Jesus is talking to some religious people in this passage, and so one of the religious people asks Jesus, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." What does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind? This is a very weighty verse. It's obviously very important. Jesus says this is the first and greatest commandment. And so I'd encourage you to spend your own time and study this week and look at this passage, look at what the Word says about how do I love God in this way. But for now, I'm going to give you 3 different ways that you can love God according to the Bible. And so we love God by putting Him first. We love God by obeying Him, and we love God by believing in Jesus. So let's start with that first point. We love God by putting Him first. Last week, Sam talked about the idea of breaking through and dealing with anxiety and worry. If you haven't watched it yet, I'd highly encourage going back and watching it. It's really good. But Sam talks about this idea of how we all have first things in our life, and we all have second things in our life. And if we want to experience true peace and true joy, we have to have God as our first thing. And so 1 John 2:15 talks about what happens if God isn't our first thing. It says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them." And so if I'm loving these second things, if I'm loving things of the world and putting them above God, then what I'm really saying is I don't love God. I'm telling God that I don't love Him. And so a really important way that we show our love to God is by putting Him first in our life. Another important way is we love God by obeying Him. I recently read a book called The 5 Love Languages, and this book is all about the idea of each of us is unique in the ways that we give love to others and the ways that we receive love from others. We all show our affection and our love in different ways, and we also prefer to receive love in different ways from each other. And so God also has His own love language, and we see it in John 14:15. This is Jesus talking. He says, "If you love me, keep my commands." And so one of the best ways that we can show God that we love him is we can obey him. God's number one love language is obedience. If I'm obedient to God, I show God that I love him. Point number 3, we love God by believing in Jesus. John 16:27 says, "The Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God." And so one great way and very important way that we can show God that we love him is by loving Jesus, by believing in Jesus, and by receiving Jesus into our life. In a lot of ways, this is the first way that we show God that we love him, by receiving his son, and in doing so, choosing to put God first in our life and choosing to obey God in every area of our life. And so what is the greatest commandment? Put simply, the greatest commandment is to love God and also to love others. Matthew 22, Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." So the first commandment, the greatest commandment, is love the Lord your God. And the second one that he gives us is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I really think in a lot of ways, if we have a right love of God, then it will also follow that we'll have a right love of people, because we learn to love God and we learn to love people the way that God loves them. And so love is talked about very differently today than maybe the Bible talks about love, especially in English. I don't know that Bisaya or Tagalog use the word love quite in the same way that English does, but we definitely overuse it. On any given week, I might say, "Man, I love S&R pizza. I love spicy chicken joy. I love Rib Shack." And I do love those things, but that is a very different love than the kind of love that the Bible is talking about. And so the last thing we're going to look at today is some verses that talk about what love is versus what love is not. And so 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8 says, "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails." And so I really hope that this verse, these verses could be a good diagnostic, a good measuring stick for us to think through, have I been loving while I've been in quarantine with my family, my friends, my neighbors, whoever's around me? Is this the kind of love that I've been showing to them? And so to answer that question, let's first look at, what love does not do. This verse says, love does not envy, love does not boast, love is not proud. Have I been envying other people in my life? Have I been envying folks that maybe are in a better place than I am as they're quarantined? Maybe they have more than I do. Maybe they have their family's community pass and they can go out in the city, whereas I'm stuck at home all day. Have I been envying what other people have? Have I been boasting about things that I have? Have I had a proud heart about my own life, my own things I'm doing? Have I been proud? Love does not dishonor others. Have I, in my words, been dishonoring to others and spoken down to them and said things that maybe were hurtful? Love is not self-seeking. As I go throughout my day, am I constantly thinking, what do I want to do today? What do I think would be the most fun? What thing would I like to do versus how can I love others well? Are all my thoughts about myself, or are my thoughts about others? Love is not easily angered. As I've been stuck at home with folks, have I been getting angry at them over little things or big things that they've said? Have I been really easily angered by them? Love keeps no record of wrongs. When I do get angry, do I really think about it for a long time and I can't get over what that person said? And lastly, love does not delight in evil. And so now let's look at things that love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. As I interact with people around me, I should be patient with them and I should be kind to them. I should smile at them. I should enjoy being with them. Love rejoices with the truth. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And so this is a very difficult thing to live up to. For me personally, even just in the past week, I can think of different ways that I very much struggle to show this kind of love to my roommates and to those around me. And I've also struggled with being unloving and doing things that maybe weren't super loving to them. Or I've been too focused on myself and not focused enough on others. And so I think a good way to view this that is helpful for me is we want God to be the first thing. The greatest commandment is love God. So first thing, God. Second thing, Jesus says, love people, love your neighbor as yourself, love others well. And then the last thing should be myself. So God is the first thing, people are the second thing, and I should view myself with humility, not with a proud heart, but with humility and an attitude of I'm last, and I want to put others above my own needs and above my own desires. And that's a real way that we can love God. It's a real way that we can love people. And in a lot of ways, that's the best way that we can have the best quarantine experience possible, is by loving others well and creating homes where we have a loving environment versus that pressure cooker where things are just gradually building up slowly and eventually blowing up. So that's all we've got today. The last thing that I think it'd be good to think through is this question at the bottom. Have I showed this kind of love to those I've been around during quarantine? How could I love my friends, family, and neighbors more like this? So try to think through one application of how could I be more loving? How could I love more the way that this verse is talking about? Or maybe as we've been reading through this, you've been able to think through, man, here's some of the things that I've been doing that have definitely been unloving. And so how could I fix those things and stop being unloving towards others and start being loving with this kind of love towards them? That's all we've got. Stay safe. I hope to see you all soon. And ping.